but thanks this afternoon. All right, I think we're official. Hello, I'm Jenna Talbot. I'm Senior Vice President at Whiteboard Advisors. I lead our communications practice here at Whiteboard, and really excited about the conversation today. We've got a great set of panelists here. The topic here is social capital. So I know for so many of us working in education, creating equitable pathways to economic mobility is really what animates a lot of our work. And we know that unlocking that opportunity isn't just about what people know, but it's also about who they know, how they navigate networks, how they navigate changing dynamics in the workplace, how they build community. And so we're going to be talking about that today. Luckily, there's lots of great people in our world that are thinking really deliberately about how we help individuals build social capital alongside our education institutions. So I'm really thrilled to have a number of those folks here. You know, as I was preparing for this, I was looking through some great survey data from Strata Education Network. And one of the things that they found in a recent report they've been doing with NESE on current student engagement, they found that first-generation students are far less likely to participate in social capital building activities. They're less likely to hold internships. We know that these are the kinds of activities that help strengthen that connection from education to employment. And that's really what we're going to spend our time on today. In the year of 2022, we can't talk about this topic without talking about technology. And so that's where you'll see a lot of the conversation anchored. We'll talk through what technology can do well, what it might not be able to do well, what we need to be thinking about to ensure that we can go about social capital building in as equitable as a way as possible. So let's get into conversation. You'll see pretty quickly everyone's bios and perspectives come to light in their answers. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time, but we have an awesome panel. Hannah Lee, who's a director at Cognizant Foundation. Thank you for joining us. We've got Ruben Harris, who's the CEO and founder of Career Karma. Christine Cruzvergara, who is the Chief Education Strategy Officer at Handshake. And certainly last but not least, Julia Freeland Fisher, who's a Director of Education at the Christensen Institute. And Julia, really, it's been a lot of your research over the last 5 or 6 years that prompted us to have this conversation. So as we kick off here, give us kind of a starting definition of what we mean by social capital. And perhaps you can give us maybe like a crash course on what you've learned in your research over these years. I know that social capital isn't always just about building networks. And so just helping the team or the group here kind of ground our definition would be helpful.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Jenna. And so thrilled to be in conversation with Hannah, Christine, and Ruben, who I think of as like really important thought partners and exemplars in this work. So yeah, social capital, not a jargony term at all, but it's really a basic concept that our networks contain value. So your financial capital, your dollars and cents in your pocket that you can get things with, your human capital, what you know and can do, and people in the labor market will pay you to do. Your social capital likewise describes the idea that your networks contain value. And that can be all sorts of value. It can be emotional support from neighbors and friends. It can be favors that people pay you. But when we're talking about access to the workforce, it can also be information about jobs, support in the job getting process, and people willing to open doors, networks, and take bets on you. And we know that opportunity is a social phenomenon. An estimated half of jobs come through personal connections. Exposure long before the job getting moment shapes our sense of future possible selves. Economic connectedness is a leading predictor of economic mobility. And so all of this sort of amounts to like, if you care about economic mobility, skills certainly matter. But the many years of the skills gap conversation has largely ignored the outsized role that networks can play in accessing the labor market. And Jenna, you sort of alluded to this, but I think in 2022, and this is really sort of after years of research predating the pandemic in terms of the role of technology in building students' networks, particularly those furthest from opportunity, we'd be crazy to ignore the potential for technology to really democratize access to connectedness, right? It's far cheaper than it was 20 or 30 years ago to overcome geographic and time costs of meeting people you might otherwise not meet. And at the same time, traditional social media has not gotten us there. It's digitized a lot of our offline networks, and I'd argue it's actually scaled distrust more than connection in a lot of ways. And I think that's why folks like Career Karma and Handshake are such exciting examples, that they're sort of looking at technology through a new lens of what does it actually mean to build authentic connection, particularly the sorts of connections you might need to get jobs that might otherwise be out of reach because of the way that social capital shapes access in our labor market. And what does it look like to actually build technology tools that don't just do what we do offline more efficiently, but do something totally different in terms of building community and access? The last thing I'd say, that as we have this conversation, Jenna, I'd love to frankly hear my colleagues' thoughts about, is that I think it is at the same time really important to be discerning about new tools emerging in the market. I think there's a lot of tools charading as networking tools that are just digitizing cold outreach. And that's great. We've all done cold outreach in our lives, and lending some efficiency to that thankless process might be good, but it's not the be all end all. It could actually perpetuate a lot of inequity and bias. I think there's a lot of tools positioned as engagement tools that may make learners and workers feel a greater sense of belonging, but not actually be about accessing more resources through those relationships. And that's really, I'll just end on that note. This idea of social capital, keep reminding ourselves, social capital refers to the resources contained in our relationships. So it's not just that I know someone, it's that I am reciprocally exchanging resources with that person. And how are we building technology tools that sort of nudge, scale, increase the likelihood that that resource exchange is happening, not just for the best connected, but for all learners and workers. So I think that's sort of where I'd love to leave off and hear from our colleagues about what they're building and doing in this space.
Yeah, and Julia, that's as we were talking about in prep, that's where I get excited when you think about what are the applications of technology. Yes, bringing content online or being able to make cold outreach more effective, right? It has its utility, but really when you think about how can we actually build relationships and expose people to experiences or people that they may not be able to reach, whether that's a geographic issue or a community issue, a family, challenge. And so I think that's a really exciting opportunity here. That on the flip side also brings challenges and the need to be really intentional. So maybe we'll start, Christine, with you just sharing a little bit about what you're observing from what you guys have built at Handshake.
Sure. Julia, thank you for, I think, one, the definition, but two, helping to sort of ground the conversation. And I think a lot of the pros and cons of what this can look like. At Handshake, our mission has always been to democratize opportunity for students, recognizing that unfortunately, the way that college recruiting or early talent recruiting was done when all of us were students is just not equitable, because you only really have access to those at your institution and to the employers that choose to come to your institution. And so by intentionally creating Handshake as a network, it allows for more opportunity and resources, Julia, as you were mentioning, to actually flow to more students in more accessible ways so that they, one, actually have the knowledge and information and exposure to begin to build these types of relationships. So I think when I'm thinking about social capital and when we're thinking about how we build that into the platform, we're thinking about it actually at a lot of different levels. It's not just the connection to a person. As you mentioned, it's first actually making sure that we're democratizing access to information, because if you don't have good information, you can't make more informed decisions. And that inherently was one of the inequities that existed for a lot of people before, right? Before, if we're thinking about sort of like pre-technology, sort of what that looked like. And so by making sure that information, whether that's from peers, whether that's from recruiters, whether that's from your school, all of that is more equitable and easily found on Handshake. And then from there, we're really thinking about how do we make it easier and remove barriers for students to actually reach out to peers at their own institution who maybe they don't take classes with, but are actually interested in really similar things or are participating in activities that are actually tangential to what they're doing. How do they connect to them? How do they connect to their alumni at their institution? But because we're a network and sort of this safe space, how do they also connect to students and alumni at other institutions that they wouldn't typically have access to? And so I think one of my favorite stories is actually of a Wellesley student that I personally knew and advised when I was associate provost there. And she was really interested in entertainment. But at Wellesley, we didn't have a huge alum base of folks that worked in entertainment and were out in LA. And Handshake had recently just launched sort of the peer-to-peer messaging. So I told the student to go on and see if she could find a student at one of the LA schools that perhaps had an entertainment major or area of focus. She ended up connecting with a student from Loyola Marymount University who had just done an internship at a studio that she was really interested in. They ended up connecting, becoming friends. And that student also ended up helping her figure out, how do you actually do an internship in LA? Where will you live when you come here for the summer? Who are some people that I can introduce you to? And vice versa, they've now actually become colleagues in the field and in the industry. And I think that's such a great example of what can happen when I think the technology is built with intention around what the purpose is, and that it's not just let's just connect in almost like a virtual exchange of business cards, but it doesn't actually mean anything. So that's a little bit of what we're doing.
Ruben, how are you thinking about this?
Yeah, man, I love the preamble that you gave Jenna and you, Julia, as well, and I like that Christine started talking about taking it old school. A lot of times when we talk about technology, we forget about the old school. And something that you said, Jenna, was that a lot of people don't engage in social capital building activities, but I would argue that they do. They just don't even realize it. And you probably heard the whole concept of like you're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with, and the people that you spend the most time with can either prohibit your growth, maintain your growth, or make you a little uncomfortable so you're growing. And I really like that Julia talked about social media having a lot of promise, but also being the cause of a lot of misinformation or things like that. And traditionally, when we think about social networks, for example, at Curriculum, we're like, we want to help 1 billion people in the next 10 years. But often, if you have a very, very large networks of people, you can actually create even more confusion. When I think about social capital, people are trying to make decisions that they can trust. And when you think about post-secondary education, after housing and transportation, post-secondary education is like the largest price tag that people tend to spend on in order to invest into themselves. And so usually the way that they make decisions is less on what an accredited government institution tells you or what a certificate says. It's more like, does my friends and family tell me that this is the school that I should go to, right? And based off of who you grew up with or who you're exposed to, that's going to lead to what you think is a vetted institution or not. So when I think about technology, I think about how can we expose learners to vetted academic institutions, not by government, but by students that have achieved what they want to achieve. Because the problem with making your decisions based off of your friends or family is a lot of times your friends or family didn't live in the world that we're in today from an educational perspective. So a lot of the decisions that they made back in the day are different, like where you go to school for 4 years and then work for 40 years, are different than an environment where you're, working in multiple jobs and going to multiple schools. And so you need to expose yourself to people that have made those decisions. So when I think about technology and social capital, how can we show that social proof on the school side, help people build the confidence and things like that. So that's the stuff that I think about how to blend those things. And the other thing that I'll say is, how can we create that smaller dynamic of groups online with people so that people can make decisions better? Like I'm a Montessori kid, and so like they talk a lot about like optimal classroom ratios, teacher child ratios, stuff like that. So stuff to think about.
Hannah, from where you sit, you've got a 30,000 foot perspective, perhaps, and get to see lots of different organizations and researchers trying to tackle some of these issues. What stands out to you when we're talking about the role of technology here?
Yeah, and thank you, Jenna, for facilitating this conversation, and Julia for giving that context up front. I think, Julia, to your point, social capital is an exchange of resources. And Ruben, I think that lends great into your conversation of you need to have that inherent trust to exchange those resources. So how are we building trust, especially in a time where we do not trust a lot of institutions? So from my role as a director at the Cognizant Foundation, we are working to equip communities to thrive in a digital economy. And to date, we have invested nearly $60 million across kind of the kindergarten to career continuum to ensure that folks who are underrepresented in technology have the pathways into technology and through kind of skill building and social capital. And really, as I see some opportunities, what was really interesting for us in COVID is obviously COVID expedited a lot of technology innovations. And when we surveyed our partners 6 months into the pandemic, about 50% of them started offering a new type of social capital element into their programming or initiative. And with that addition of those new social capital elements, I think came better job attainment, job retention, and kind of career progression for their students and learners. And so as I think about that opportunity that technology has, we saw it play out in so many different training providers. I also think there are so many things we have to be guarding against, including things like 21 million Americans not having access to high-speed internet. How are we thinking about that? How are we ensuring that learners and students cannot just connect via their laptops, but by their mobile phones, where most people are connecting online? So I'm really excited to explore this conversation. I know Christine and Ruben, you all are like leaders in this technology, and we are learning from you a lot. So excited to hear the learnings from today.
Well, Hannah, this maybe brings me to a question for Christine, because you talked about so many of your grantees, starting programs in the midst of COVID. Christine, you guys quickly shifted to virtual networking, which kind of became the norm across higher ed. And of course, there's some natural inclination to go back to normal and think about doing everything back fully in person. But one thing that really stood out to me when you all were surveying students about whether they liked the virtual networking, I think we saw some really interesting and perhaps startling findings, maybe not surprising in a lot of ways, but you were hearing from students in particular. You heard from about 60% of Black students who said they felt more comfortable participating in virtual networking and felt like they were more likely to be seen by future employers. And I think there was another stat around Black and Latinx students feeling more likely to apply to a job after they had participated in a virtual event. And one of the things you heard a lot was confidence building. So I'm curious if you can share what you've learned from those experiences, and in talking back with your higher ed partners and making the case for where virtual might complement in person. What's kind of the feeling on campuses today around this topic?
Yeah, Jenna, you're right about all those stats. And actually, I would include women as well. So it was women and students of color, over 50%, in many cases 60 or a little bit above 60%, all said that they felt more seen, they felt more prepared, they felt like they could be more themselves, which then led to more authentic connections and conversations, which then resulted in them applying more. And so I think for us, a big piece that we've had to really emphasize to our higher ed partners is that while there is absolutely a place for in-person, all of us are excited to resume certain things back in person. I myself am in the office today to connect with some of my own colleagues. It doesn't mean that we need to abandon what we've learned also works in the virtual world. And the real question for all of us now is to figure out, how do we optimize for both modalities in a way that is best for all of the various students that we're trying to serve? And so in person may be really fantastic for a lot of students, and quite frankly, for a lot of employers. But there's also a subset of students that you don't want to forget about. And it's the same subset of students that, quite frankly, every employer right now really also cares about, and they're trying to attract, they're trying to bring into their organizations. So we would be remiss to not also offer some virtual components so that those students can also get the connections that they're looking for. They will very easily look elsewhere, quite frankly, if you don't provide those things, right? And I think that's something that we need to take into consideration. I also think another component that's super important for higher ed, my higher ed colleagues to recognize, is that because virtual is not going anywhere in the work world, it is our job as educators to prepare students for what it means to connect and build those relationships virtually. Jenna, in our prep, I used you and I as an example. We've been working together for 3 years. I would consider you someone that I now closely collaborate with and feel comfortable enough texting. And at the same time, we have only met once in person, right? But we've developed a really great relationship, and we've actually done that all completely digitally. And so it's a matter of learning how to build the relationship. The technology itself is not going to magically make that happen. It's just a medium. What you do with that and how you interact is what's actually really important. And so as educators, we have to teach students, how do you make those connections? What does it look like to actually build and foster a relationship? How do you properly communicate in a way that allows you to be vulnerable and to share and to build the trust that Ruben was talking about earlier? Those are all skill sets that we have to learn, and doing it virtually versus doing it in person does carry some differences in that. But I'll end by saying, we did another survey with a bunch of our students talking about social capital specifically, and 80% of them said that they believe it is much easier for them to make professional connections than their parents' generation. And they very much attributed that to the rise in digital technology and connection and the ability to use that to spark those connections. And what I found most fascinating was when you looked at the gender split, women were about 20 points higher than men in believing that you can build meaningful relationships digitally. And so I think when you're looking at that and we're looking at making our world more equitable, we have to think about how do we engage and use technology as a tool and as a medium to foster those relationships.
And Christine, when you talked about, like, it's not just the technology, you actually have to teach people how to use it and build those meaningful relationships. As you talk to career services, directors and leaders on campuses, I'm curious, do people feel equipped to do that? A lot of that seems intuitive in some cases, but it's not always, right? And certainly not with technology as a medium. So what are you hearing from partners? Are there kind of innovative things that are bubbling up?
I think it really varies. I think some partners are really comfortable with it, and they've been able to develop some really amazing workshops and resources for their students to learn how to do this more regularly. Some are still kind of getting their feet wet and they're figuring out what that looks like. I think, honestly, it's not rocket science. The ones that are really doing it well are utilizing the technology themselves. And so they're engaging the students with the use of technology, whether that's Zoom, whether that's Handshake, whatever that may be, and they're actually practicing with the student, and they're not afraid to give the students feedback as they're going through that. They're building trust themselves with the students, and they are going to be part of the students' network and social capital. And so I think it's the folks that are actually just, quite frankly, trying it. They're using it, they're doing it, they're practicing, and they're giving feedback as they go along, and they're constantly learning from what doesn't work. And sharing that with the students as well.
Julia, you want to chime in on just this idea of, like, what does our post-pandemic reality look like? This has, to Hannah's point earlier, accelerated a big shift, but what are you seeing there?
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny, I use the term post-pandemic like every other day, and then my kids are in quarantine from daycare. So it's like, when is post-pandemic? Tell me, someone. I think just 3 core principles, and I would love Ruben to share on the last one, at least, like of our gut instincts around how should we use all the infrastructure that was built up over the past 2.5 years around forming connections, around video chat, around all sorts of things that, again, like, was sort of accelerated, to Hannah's point. I think there's 3. One is we have the chance to start to take the chance out of chance encounters. I'll say that one more time. Take the chance out of chance encounters. We leave so much in our traditional education and, frankly, recruitment practices to, like, meeting the right person at the right time. And as sort of charming as the notion of a chance encounter can be, like, why are we leaving so much to chance would be my question. And by having ways to, even in a data-driven way, ensure that students and learners and workers are connecting on a regular cadence, you're actually just getting more reps in, which we know can lead to better outcomes, more options in the labor market. The second is really leveraging technology for connections otherwise out of reach. So we all know that we don't want to do, like, Zoom Thanksgiving Thanksgiving this year again, right? Like there are types of connections that we want to enjoy in person, but there are still connections, whether it's because of geography or cost, that are out of reach for students. And that's where technology is an immensely helpful tool that shouldn't be seen as less than, but actually like better than nothing, for lack of a better term. But the last piece I think is really around the concept of affinity, and being able to bring together peer-to-peer or groups of affinity-based groups on a much more nimble and on-demand basis, because we know similarity breeds trust and belonging. It's why all sorts of companies and higher ed institutions have affinity groups. And yet those can be very sort of fixed structures when we don't have the tools to actually resort people as their interests, goals, and needs change. And so, Ruben, as you were talking about this idea of like, who are you going to make your decisions about your educational professional pathway, having a support group around you who are in a similar place in their education or career, or just a step or two ahead of you, is incredibly powerful. But you have to do that flexibly, because our goals and lives are changing on a regular basis. And our sort of old structures around that, I think, are problematic. I'll say one more thing and then Ruben, get in. I think I'll directly quote our colleague Chris Motley, who's building a tool called Mentor Spaces that is really looking at mentoring as a strategy for recruitment and focus specifically on Black and Latino early career starters. And I talked to Chris a lot about the notion of affinity, and also the notion of making sure that we're connecting workers and learners of color across lines of difference to ensure that they have access that their white peers may have outsized access to because of the composition of their networks. Chris made the point that early on, in a user on his platform might actually seek out someone who looks like them. And later on, regardless of the race of the sort of mentor they're trying to talk to on the platform, they're actually just looking for someone who's aligned to their interests and goals. And so affinity can be both along lines of race and ethnicity and interests or goals. And again, I think technology allows us flexibility rather than sort of picking one group and sticking in it because we were sort of assigned to it at the start. So Ruben, I don't know if any of that resonates with what you've built, but it's how I think of Career Karma's flexible sort of infrastructure.
I mean, I think everything everybody shared was resonates. I mean, I'll talk about all three of you. I know Hannah talked about Wi-Fi, for example. So traditionally, when you think about wraparound support, people are going to talk about Wi-Fi, books, laptops. Cognizant itself contributed to a campaign we have called Reskill America to help people get laptops. But what a lot of people don't think about when it comes to wraparound support is psychological. A lot of things that you guys are bringing up. I love that you all talked about the pandemic and how it launched a lot of virtual things like video. But something else that happened with the Great Lockdown was the growth of audio, right? Social audio. Why is that important? Well, first of all, our roots are on audio. So before we started Career Karma, we started a podcast called Breaking Into Startups. And before that, I worked in radio, and how it fits with small groups is I used to be a gamer. I used to play games like Counter-Strike. I used to play, World of Warcraft, StarCraft, things like that. Why is that important? It's because some of these relationships I built online without ever seeing somebody's face are friends that I have in real life today. And I built very strong relationships over years without even seeing this individual on video. And people talk about things like Zoom fatigue and blah, blah, blah. And long story short, during the pandemic, we launched live audio rooms, which is kind of like Discord and Clubhouse had a baby focus on careers. And I think when it comes to video or audio or anything that's asynchronous, it's cool from a broad application, but it's even more powerful when it's specific, like what Discord did, focus on gamers, right? I say this because it brings me to affinity. Yes, there's a lot of power bringing people together that are your same race or your same gender, so on and so forth. But I think that's not enough to build trust, actually. Just because you're another woman or another Black person doesn't mean that you had the same upbringing that I had, or that you had to struggle the way that I struggled, or you overcame the obstacles that I had to overcome. So I think as we think about affinity and shared groups, how do we bring people to have the same shared struggle, right? So for example, if I'm working with a large airline and I'm dealing with flight attendants, yes, they might all have the same affinity from a role perspective, but there's a lot of things that it has to do with your schedule, with mental health, with so many things that you have to deal with that is very unique to them. And so I agree with everything that you all said, but I think as you think about these virtual spaces of technology, there are some formats, to your point, that lend to in-person conversations. There's some things that are appropriate from a text perspective, from a video perspective, from an audio perspective, that all have different factors when it comes to psychological wraparound support and motivation to push through these programs that you will not feel like doing on a day-to-day basis. Like, because it's hard, you will have to study when you don't feel like it. And so having someone that has a shared struggle with you, that's like, hey, I know it sucks and I know we got this crazy schedule, but let's do this today. It's like going to the gym. So
Ruben, the example you just gave about the flight attendants is also one I want to call out, because the context is learning in the context of work, right? And so we talked a little bit with Christine about maybe a more traditional notion of you start out at school, you end up moving to, into a career. But, of course, education has long been a benefit for many employees, and we've seen an explosion of that in the last few years. We've seen employers also think much more intentionally about using education as a benefit. And we were talking about this in prep, right? You're seeing employers acknowledge that it's not just offering it, but it's thinking about the particular use case for an individual employee. Then they're realizing we need to bring in support, not just on the academic side, but career coaching, how to navigate with your direct manager, that you have a test at the same time that you are on the schedule to work, right? Talk to us a little bit about how you're seeing employers think about social capital alongside some of the education benefits and opportunities they're providing for frontline workers.
yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, to your point, education benefits aren't brand new. They've existed for years. I mean, McDonald's had its own university. And so people have LMS, LXPs, like all these things, launching their own institutions or just offering it as a tuition reimbursement. And first of all, a lot of people don't even know that they can get a job that pays for their education. But even if they do know that their job is paying for their education, they don't know if they sign up for it, that it will, what opportunities it unlocks internally, right? If they are aware of the benefits and they are aware of the opportunities that it unlocks internally, do they know that their hiring manager cares about it? How is that demonstrated? So employers are wanting to like make sure that they know that not only are they facilitating the benefit, but that they actually care about it, not just from a CEO or a L&D perspective that we're funding it and it's a nice press release, but all the way down, how are we supporting the hiring manager of the frontline worker? A lot of people don't talk about that part of things as well. And then assuming that you have both of those people bought in, you have the shared affinity groups, or the people that have the shared struggle. Let's say it's like the flight attendant group with the hiring manager and the opportunities that are available at the end. How do we make sure that everybody that does care about it, assuming that they do care about it, can see progress, so that if people are actually struggling, they can step in and support and mentor or guide. Mentorship takes many forms. There's the peer mentorship. So you might already have someone that has already gone from flight attendant into software engineer that can talk to you from day one. So you're like, wow, this is possible. I can talk to you today. Like, that's amazing. And a lot of things like that. And I think that the conversation with technology often focuses on just ROI and analytics and understanding what's going on, which is great. But once you have that information, how do you make adjustments to the program? How do you run experiments to iterate and make it better? You know, that's one of the other things about technology that's really great. And I think there's a lot of power on the peer mentorship, hiring manager, and all the way at the top. So you can have something that's going not just tops down or bottom up, which tends to be all the only things that we talk about, but something that is core through the entire organization.
helpful.
Okay, so many ideas running through my head. Let's zoom back out for a second, less about the technology, but I'm curious, Christine, you guys are students of Gen Z. You've also been serving millennials, of course. I'm curious, how are generational differences impacting how we think about building social capital? Certainly there's the technology component of it, but I'm just curious, what have you guys observed? Julia, maybe this has come up in your research as well, but Christine, curious what you guys are learning as you watch Gen Z right now as one of, we've got our first few classes graduating college and moving into the workplace.
I think the core tenet of how we think about social capital is not actually different between generations, but the way in which it manifests is. So I'll explain what that means. Trust has always been at the very core of social capital. We talked about it at the beginning of this conversation. We've talked about it throughout. It still remains true. You go to where you trust. You go to the people you trust to ask the questions, and you trust often the advice that they're giving you, and you'll often follow it, right? The biggest difference, I would say, from generation to generation is simply what is the size and scope of the circle of trust. So in previous generations, trust was perhaps a smaller circle. It was maybe your family, it was maybe your friends, it was maybe people in your community, your faith group, your school, people that you knew in person because that was the main way of interacting. And so those were the people you trusted. And I think when you talk about millennials and you talk about Gen Z, it's still based on trust. If you ask them, they're not going to go listen to somebody they don't trust. But I think a lot of older generations would be surprised by how many Gen Zs, quite frankly, go to TikTok for career advice, and they go to Career Talk, right? And so an older generation person might think, what does that kid know about how to get a job in consulting? And for a Gen Z student right now, they're thinking, but I trust him because he's real and he's authentic and he's done it himself. Exactly what Ruben was saying before, right? And so there's a level of trust. And so I think the reality is simply just that younger generations define trust differently. And they're more willing, quite frankly, to actually trust those that are peers, not just those that are older than them, because they view it as authentic and real. There's a rawness to, I think, the way in which information is now shared that this generation, certainly Gen Z, even more than millennials, they want sort of the unpolished, unvarnished, real talk with each other. And that goes a really long way. Whereas I do think the older generation often look to the experts. If you're an expert, I'll listen to you. And that's not necessarily the case with this particular generation. So trust is at the core. I think just the size and scope of who you trust has changed.
One thing to piggyback on what Christine just said is, I actually think that there's a distrust from institutions, even if you are someone that has great outcomes, right? Because if I am telling you that my school is the best and that I have all the outcomes, I'm going to be skeptical. Of course, you're going to say that you're the best. I want to talk to somebody that went through your program that tells me that it's the best, because whoever created Ruben's School of Business is going to say, yes, my School of Business is the greatest if you're talking to me, but not to somebody that's been through my program. So that's something to keep in mind about why people are going directly to the people versus the people that created the curriculums.
Absolutely. They want the social proof. To them, it's social proof.
Yeah, well, and I know, Christine, you guys rolled out, reviews on the platform a number of years ago where students could actually share their experience, and then peers are able to look and see. You gave the example of, your own student reaching across the country, right, to find a student. I'm sure she asked about her experience too. And what was it like to work at this studio? Were you treated well? Did you have the right opportunities? And so that's where, obviously, we're just bringing this full circle. That's where that all comes together. Julia, anything you'd add there? Hannah, I'm curious, to what degree do you think tools like what we've been talking about can actually nudge post-secondary institutions or training providers, or employers to source and support their talent differently? Are we learning? Are you seeing action taken on that side of the conversation?
Yeah, and to Christine and Ruben's points, like they gave a lot of great examples of how those tools are actually changing employers' minds. And I think it does come back to that trust piece, both in the sourcing and career progression. Once individuals have the job, what does their career progression throughout the company look like? And we have so many examples of training providers that are doing this in really creative ways. So for example, Ada Developers Academy, they train women and gender expansive adults to be software engineers. And they go through a 7-month program. And upon completion of the program, they're placed into a tech company. And any manager that accepts one of those ADA graduates has to go through an implicit bias training and also figure out how to support that individual while they are on the job. So usually software engineering teams look majority white and male, but as you coach these managers through how are you supporting this person, building trust with this person, and like supporting them and progressing throughout their career, I think is so important. So I think those tools are definitely allowing folks to get their foot in the door, but like, how are you then coaching the hiring managers, the managers to really support in building that social capital in intentional ways throughout being on the job and then the career progression?
Yeah, I think that's, I know we'll maybe jump to this question now, because I think that's exactly, we often talk about social capital building in the context of access, right? And getting your foot in the door, getting that first job. And we often talk about it from the perspective of the individual, the career seeker. But Hannah, two things from your comments there is, how do we actually equip hiring managers or managers to help build that social capital? And the other piece too is, once someone gets into that first job, how do you then navigate what the second job looks like? How do you navigate promotion internally? How do you advocate for development, right? How do you make sure that those individuals are building the networks across their industry or across their institution? So I'm curious, maybe starting with from the perspective of the individual, what are we learning about what role social capital plays once they're actually in a job?
I mean, I think competency modeling is starting to become more and more important. I think the role of HR and people development is becoming more and more important, because historically, when people think about HR, it's more of like, how do you deal with conflict, like harassment or diversity issues or a bunch of other like more administrative stuff. But now you're starting to see HR teams focusing still on those things in talent attraction, but more on like, how can we grow our players, especially in a world where there might be a lot of hiring freezes, or there might be a big focus on retention. In a world where, similar to sports, where free agency got introduced, people don't stay at one company forever if they don't want to, right? So the power is still in the people. So people teams, CEOs are starting to rely more on their people teams to create a culture where they're able to demonstrate that they're invested in them from day one. And one of those ways to do it is not to just do the competency modeling, to ask the individual where they want to grow in their career outside of how much they want to be paid, but also investing in it from day one. And from a social capital perspective, how do we give you a work buddy that is in that role from day one, right? Outside of your hiring manager, that you could check in with like once a month, so you can stay. That's a carrot too. It's not just a raise or a promotion that keeps you excited, that makes you want to go to where you want to go. So I think competency modeling is something that people aren't talking about enough outside of compensation, but also creating this comfort internally, where very similar, you might see it more at startups versus at traditional companies, where it's okay to switch your job into something else at a company. A lot of people think they have to stay as an accountant forever or as an engineer forever. If you have front-end skills as an engineer, you could be a good designer, right? Or even good in marketing. I mean, my co-founder is probably the best SEO person in the world, but he started off in engineering, right? And in finance before that. And so just really letting people know that you can actually do multiple things in a lifetime at the company. We'll invest in you and expose you to those individuals, not just with the shared struggle or affinity or a direct role, but a different role as well. So you know what's available outside of just reading it on paper and maybe even shadowing them on the job to see what it looks like.
I had a feeling this conversation was going to go fast, so I'm looking at the clock and wanting to get to a few other questions. And I will remind folks that if you've got questions, drop them in the Q&A or in the chat. We'll certainly make time to get to those. Julia, so let's talk about skills-based hiring. We're seeing more and more employers begin to rethink the degree as the appropriate, hiring requirement, which is really exciting. Opportunity at Work has done some amazing research and advocacy on this front. Hannah, you guys have funded a lot of their work. I think it provides a really important opportunity. At the same time, I'm curious, Julia, how does that momentum intersect with social capital? And as we think about the move to alternative ways to hire, what are the opportunities and what are the watch outs?
Yeah, totally, Jenna. And I saw this question in the Q&A as well from Keel, I think it is. So I think it's a great question. And I think let's first sort of speak to the elephant in the room that Keel, you brought up, which is social capital seems like the least meritocratic thing ever. Like, it shouldn't be who you know that matters. It should be purely what you know. And I think skills-based hiring is an answer to that. That is incredibly important in making hiring practices more meritocratic, period, end of sentence. This should not be in lieu of more fair, equitable, and skills-based hiring practices. But to put the two in dialogue, I actually think gets to an even more fair system in certain ways, because for a couple reasons. If you think about who helped you get to where you are today, even if you were not the beneficiary of a nepotistic or problematic hiring practice, along the way, who you know shapes not only your exposure across the career continuum, but also who is willing to support you and take a bet on you along the way. We are, after all, social creatures, and we don't want to create a system that is that rejects all forms of helping behaviors in service of meritocracy. We want to create a system where who you know doesn't give you an outsized advantage at the moment of hiring. But pre-hiring and post-hiring, we actually want people to be well networked so that they are actually realizing their greatest potential by being able to rely on those around them. So that's one way to sort of put these two in dialogue of the moment of hiring. We may not want a system. We certainly shouldn't want a system where you get to the top of the resume pile because your uncle is the CEO. But what led you to apply to that job is deeply embedded in your social context. And whether you can thrive in that job will depend on your ability to be in relationship with your colleagues, clients, et cetera. The other thing I think that is important to sort of point out there is the interaction of networks and optionality. And one of the shortcomings of the skills-based conversation, I think, is the speed at which skills sort of decay in terms of importance in the labor market, and then we have to reskill, right? This is the nature of a sort of turbulent, ever-changing labor market. And if you think about your own children maybe and wanting to prepare them for a future workforce that we actually don't know everything about, one way to future-proof them is to ensure that they have access to a diverse network that offers them optionality. Right. And so it's not in lieu of skills, it should not be instead of skills, but making sure that we actually know a variety of people who can help us realize our potential, change our careers, et cetera, actually means optionality for more people, not just the wealthiest, most well-connected. Would love to hear my colleagues' thoughts on that, but I think it's such an important, it's important to kind of put these two in dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, I like the concept of calling out the shortcomings of skills-based hiring. That's consistent with, I saw that question in the comments as well. I think I'll be very brief because I know we're limited on time. Assuming everybody has a skill, let's say everybody has a skill and they're interviewing for the same job, you got to realize that you can't just hire off of skills alone, whether you went to college or boot camp or not. Why? Because it's very similar to a basketball team. People like working with people that they like, right? And so if you could check the boxes that you can do the skill, and assuming it's a competitive company, everybody's going to be able to do the work. So what's going to differentiate you is your social qualities, your non-work related qualities, the way you communicate, the way you what your life experience has been related to adding value there. So I think that's a shortcoming. How do you really like assess the qualitative side of things? Maybe even the networks that you grew up in that could add a lot of value. I think that's one thing. With respect to what you said about the larger institutions and companies dropping the requirements to have a college degree, opportunity of work is great, but I think 110 is doing a lot of really powerful stuff with CEO-led dropping of the requirements to have a college degree. That was started by Ken Chenault, former CEO of American Express, that has a lot of big companies like Delta and Nike and others that are starting to become a part of it. And Christensen Institute also has a great article called Betting on Boot Camps. And Clay Christensen, RIP, like has talked about this happening for a while with colleges where a lot of them aren't going to be here. But in my opinion, colleges aren't going to go away. They're just going to have to launch shorter, faster, cheaper models, which is why Cruzvergara bet on boot camps from the beginning, not as the future, but as the model that traditional education institutions are going to adopt. So yeah, one more thing, sorry.
Oh,
And then
go ahead.
with the colleges, part of the value of college is actually not the education side, it's actually the social experience that you get from it, which we're trying to replicate virtually and in person. So sorry, Hannah.
Oh, no, that was great. And to build on your points, Ruben and Julia, your points, I think Opportunity Work has done such a great job contextualizing that are 71 million workers in the United States who do not have the 4-year degree and they're skilled through alternative routes. And by really having employers remove those degree requirements, I think it has opened employers' mind to say there are multiple pathways into a job. But if we would look, a lot of employers have made statements on, we are dropping degree requirements from our jobs, or this percentage of degree requirements are no longer in our job descriptions. The question I would ask is, how many stars are you actually hiring? I don't think we have the data on that quite yet. And I think as we have this conversation, social capital and skills are so important to bring together and bring that conversation together, because that's how we'll really get to equity. And the way to do that is through training like HR managers to say, like, if we are moving degree requirements and we do not want to just put everyone's resume on top that is connected to the CEO, to your point, Julia, how are we redesigning our hiring systems in an equitable way that unlocks both the talent for skills and social capital?
I'm going to try to go through as many of these quickly. Julia, I think there's a great question here about how does social capital fit into K-12 in your view? You've spent a lot of time thinking about this. Do you want to give a quick answer there?
I would never say this sentence except for there's 6 minutes left. I wrote a book on this topic called Who You Know, about what a more networked K-12 system could look like. But I think, Lucas, just to your question, the big shift that we're hoping to see in K-12 schools is starting to treat social capital as a programmatic outcome. So students are graduating not just with a diploma, but also a network in hand, and looking at all the sort of career connected learning experiences that are emerging in K-12 right now, seeing those not just as exposure or content delivery exercises. Sorry, that's my geriatric dog who wants to go outside. Not just content exercises.
We made it almost all the way.
But I know, but connection exercises where students are meeting people they might otherwise not know, or having new types of conversations with people they already know about their jobs. Because how often did you do that when you were 11, 12, 13? Quick answer.
Can I answer the social capital being transferable one?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. We have another question here. Yep.
Yes, I think that one's powerful, not just because of what Christine's done with Handshake, but also what we did Y Combinator, and like when Initialize invested in Cruzvergara, he said that it's kind of like Y Combinator for the people. For the people that don't know what Y Combinator is, it's the world's largest tech accelerator, $300 billion in value. What they do is they bet on first-time founders, which you could think about it as the equivalent of someone that doesn't have a college degree. They help them raise money, which you could assume is like going to a prestigious institution, and now you have credibility, not just from the person that you raise money from, but also for your upbringing, which is this network of people. So there's over 2,000 companies that have been through it. When I think about that being transferable. What's really powerful about Y Combinator is no matter who you raise money from or what you do in the future, that brand gets stronger. So as you go from school to school to school or company to company to company, you're still part of the Handshake network or the Career Karma network or whatever. So as we think about the social capital, you can always go to that family of strangers that gave you that advice to get you into your first institution and maybe your next institution and maybe your next job, which is that good career karma that we want to be spreading everywhere. So yeah.
I see how you did that. Nice tie back. All right. Perhaps one last question here from Mark Roast. Can you share resources to empower community organizing groups to fill an HR role in helping community members fill new technology roles? So I think this is really around, how do we not only think about hiring managers, not only think about this with the formal institutions between, education and employers, but how do we also help community members play a role perhaps in building social capital?
I would point to a model called Union Capital Boston that's doing amazing work across Boston, low-income and middle-income neighborhoods to really just connect community members and create sort of a flywheel of reciprocity and resource exchange. And they've seen really impressive both employment and education enrollment gains through that. And it's really just, they hold networking nights where community members come and say if they have asks or if they have shares, and it's catalyzed social capital across entire communities. So that's one model that has done amazing work at the sort of community organizing level.
Great. I'm going to end us with quick popcorn. I always like to end on a high note. We're talking here about really the possibility of social capital to help make good on the promise of education. And I'm curious, you all, we've talked about a lot of the concerns. We've talked about gaps in networks. We've talked about all kinds of racial and gender inequities. But in this moment, what gives you hope that we're making progress and that people are thinking intentionally about how social capital goes hand in hand with social mobility? I'll pick on Christine. Yeah.
Okay, I'll start. I'm going to actually take this in a slightly different direction than any of my comments so far in today's conversation. And I think what gives me hope is what I'm currently seeing in K through 12. And with my own son. I have a 9-year-old who just started 4th grade. And I think one of the things that heartens me the most is that there is actually a real focus and learning around social and emotional development. And that is, I know, not necessarily uniform across all K through 12, but so much of social capital and relationship building starts with that. It starts with self-awareness. It starts with being able to read and understand yourself and have that self-awareness, and then to have that awareness of other people. And I think it, quite frankly, fits perfectly with what Ruben was saying, because once everybody can do the skill, comes down to those other qualities that then really set you apart. And I quite frankly believe that learning has to start very, very young. And I think, our hope is literally in our children and in the future of our society. So it's a bit idealistic, but that's where I'm at.
Hannah.
What gives me hope is the work that Julia is leading around actually measuring social capital. What are the metrics, and how do we scale these metrics so that we can prove that this is something that is critically important to economic and social mobility?
Yeah, all of these things give me hope. I think what gives me hope is, it might be a controversial opinion, but I feel that if you have a laptop and an internet connection, that this is the most opportunity we've had in our entire history. Like, it doesn't matter what your background is, you should actually be able to elevate yourself to another place if you know where to look. And I really like this. Some people that are actually like getting rid of the term like white collar or gray collar or even blue collar, they're just talking about ascending or descending. So if you have technology, you can ascend, and if you're not like leveraging technology, you might be descending. That's not always the case, but just how do we get beyond class mindsets that sometimes are created through educational institutions and start just talking about how we can make progress in whatever we want to make progress in. And so that gives me a lot of hope. And the fact that we're even having this conversation is helpful. And I like that we're starting to not just have it in spaces with leaders like this, but actually with the people that are affected. Like, you can't talk about homelessness without talking to homeless people, but people love doing that. So you can't talk about issues for people that don't have college degrees without talking to people that don't have college degrees. So let's have those voices in the room. And I'm excited that about the work that Julia Whiteboard and Jenna and everybody else is doing here. So
Julia.
I know we're at time, so I'll just say, I think there's a swell of a recognition that everyone needs support networks, and education institutions need to invest more in support networks. And I think if we nail that, then we nail professional networks, not the other way around. So that gives me a lot of hope that we're actually going to show up as human beings in the career pathways conversation.
Well, I certainly feel a little bit better knowing that the four of you are all playing a role in this conversation. So thank you so much for taking the time, Hannah, Julia, Christine, Ruben. Thank you to Zoom for bringing us together from all different parts of the country. I'm not completely zoomed out yet, especially not after conversations like this. Thank you all for joining us. We're recording. We'll make sure that it goes out. So if you have friends or colleagues that want to make sure to capture the conversation, we hope you will share. But thank you so much and have a great afternoon.
thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jenna.